Conversations. I'm Gabrielle Rosson, and I'm here today with Massachusetts State Senator Julian Cyr. Julian, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you, Gabrielle.
Thank you. Now, there's quite a bit going on in the world right now, especially concerning climate change. Swedish 16-year-old student Greta Thunberg invited the world to strike with her regarding the climate crisis, specifically calling on legislators such as yourself to take part in finding solutions. Can you tell me about the local response and what you're working on to help address this crisis?
So we had a pretty robust day on Friday. Climate activism is certainly nothing new to the Cape and Islands District and to our region. But Friday was something really special. And I was in Truro, actually, my hometown. And they, activists organized a pretty special thing. So there's a lot, a lot of what we see, or I often see, right, are adults talking at or talking to, younger people and children. And this wasn't that at all. This was actually, folks made signs. I even made a little sign, right? And then the adults sort of it was a beautiful afternoon. The adults were sort of in the perimeter. And then about 30 children went around and sort of we had a sort of soundless conversation, right, with their signs and our signs. And I just thought it was pretty powerful. We've got a lot to do on this issue, and Massachusetts broadly has been in the forefront compared to other states. I think we need to do more. And that's twofold. So first is just around climate resiliency and adaptation. We have done so much damage. Like, we're experiencing climate disruption. Like, that is a fact of our life here for Cape Codders. It's a fact of life for Islanders. So we need to have support and services and resources, really, to our municipalities. The House actually, earlier before the summer break, passed a GreenWorks package, which is $1 billion in resources that'll come to communities. It's modeled after a similar program called the MassWorks program that provides basically infrastructure resources to towns. So that's $1 billion GreenWorks program. The governor has a proposal to double the transfer tax for property and use that, which is $1 billion over 10 years, for climate adaptation. I think we've got such a big problem here that we need both proposals. We need the $1 billion that's under the Speaker's proposal. We need the $1 billion under the Governor's proposal. I'm supporting and calling for a $2 billion investment in climate adaptation and resiliency. So that's kind of part one. That's just the fact of life we're living in today. But we've really got to step up this transition to a clean energy future. It's really unfortunate that the Trump administration is stonewalling and delaying the first major offshore wind farm in the country. This is Vineyard Wind, 18 miles south of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Other projects are getting delayed. The state needs to really push for this, and we need to really keep on a real transition to a clean energy future. And I think we've got to have really hard conversations, about putting a price on carbon, looking at how do we really transition away from fossil-based fuels to certainly offshore wind, solar. There's some specific policies that are slowing down solar installation in the state. So I'd like to see us do all of that. I want to start with this climate adaptation. The House has started that, but I think we need to go further. I think we don't need $1 billion. We need $2 billion over 10 years to address this crisis, and that's what I'm proposing.
That's wonderful. How can people learn more about this, or how can people, I know for myself, I always get frustrated because I know that lawmakers and decision makers are struggling to approve or not approve these bills. How can the everyday person on the street do something to help with this issue, in your opinion?
I think first you just got to chime in with us, right? Make sure you're heard and you're registered. The most effective way is just to either pick up the phone or to write a personal email. Okay. If they're form emails, they kind of end up going into a certain folder when we get back to them. But if you're speaking from the heart, you're speaking personally. I think two, showing up in your municipalities and challenging your municipalities to get really good on a clean energy future. We spend we emit a lot of carbon. We do a lot of things that are not great for the climate in our own communities, looking there. And then I think three, really having conversations with folks about what it's going to take. If you heard, Greta Thunberg at the UN, she was really calling on all of us adults, and you and I are not that old, but right, we're still adults, and really calling us adults out and saying, hey, look, shame on you, she says, I should be in school. I shouldn't be having to do this. You all need to step up. And that's really the message that I think decision makers need to hear. And we need to move forward. We've dragged our heels on this issue for way too long. We've put profits ahead of not only the environment, we put profits ahead of our own future. And I think now we're seeing that here on the Cape and Islands, that climate disruption is real. It is a fact of life, and it is only getting more intense, more extreme. And we need to move quickly to change that, to avert that. But we also got to prepare for essentially what's our new reality.
Absolutely. She is such an inspiration to today's youth and really to adults and to this issue. I hope everyone is listening. Now, speaking of education, I understand you're working on a bill that would add $1.5 million to the public school system over the next 7 years. Can you tell us about the Student Opportunity Act?
So I'm the only member of the Cape and Islands Legislative Delegation that serves on the Joint Committee on Education. And last week, we released a bill that is a $1.4 billion investment in the funding formula that funds K through 12 public education. Okay. This is called the Chapter 70 formula. Okay. It's a pretty complicated formula, but it basically determines, all right, how much money is a given school district, a given community going to get from the state to support education. And what we've learned, so the initial law was passed in 1993. I was a product of that law, right? I went through the school system under those education reforms, the public system then. But really, if you look at Massachusetts schools, broadly, we do really well, but we have a really persistent achievement gap. And this is particularly for low-income students, for brown and black students, for English language learners, for students with special needs. So the bill is a $1.4 billion investment in addition to inflation, right? Okay. So if you include inflation, over 7 years, this is $2.1 billion additional dollars to public schools. Okay. It focuses first on low-income students and changes the way that we allocate resources. Okay. For instance, the Dennis-Yarmouth School District, it's going to count more of the students in the Dennis-Yarmouth District, in the Monomoy District, in Barnstable and Mashpee, of those students who are low income. So currently the formula only counts up to 135% of federal poverty level. This goes to 185%. That's significant.
That is.
Two, we're looking at more resources for English language learners. If you talk to schools, some of the most challenging students they have are English language learners, particularly those who come in older, right? So if you get a kindergartner or a first grader who's an English language learner, they're going to pick up language a lot easier, and it's less costly, really, to get them up to speed in English proficiency than if you have someone who's in high school.
Right.
So we look at English language learners. Okay. We also increase resources to municipalities and to districts around special education costs and around healthcare costs as well, a big driver of costs to school districts. Okay. We look at transportation under the special education circuit breaker, which is how we reimburse school districts up to 75% of their special education costs. The old formula only took into account instructional costs. It didn't take into account transportation. That's a very, very big cost, especially in a place like Cape Cod. We're now going to be reimbursing transportation costs. There's a proposal in here as well that looks at the needs of rural schools and schools with declining enrollment. That's not less the case so here on the Mid-Cape, but if you go to the Outer Cape and the Lower Cape, we certainly have declining enrollment. So there's a lot in this bill. It is a pretty significant piece of legislation. It's a once-in-a-generation piece of legislation. Yeah. You're probably going to ask sort of what happens next. So it's been, the Education Committee has released the bill. It's been sent to the Senate. We're going to take up the bill in early October. We're going to debate the bill. We will pass it. It'll then go to the House, and hopefully we'll see swift action and it's signed into law. But it's a very big deal, and it's going to mean significant dollars for all the school districts here on Cape Cod.
Okay, and I'm guessing this is another one of those things that local parents and people should be calling and writing and saying, we want this.
Yes,
right?
I mean, we're passing it in the Senate, like we're doing it.
Okay.
So, certainly glad to hear from folks.
Okay.
But I think especially pressure, in particular on the governor, who his proposals have always been much more modest.
Okay.
The Senate's really been the one here where we've been pushing the envelope and really looking to fund these levels. The budget we passed, the FY20 budget that's in effect now, is the most significant investment in education we've ever seen. We're essentially going to be continuing to do that over these next 7 years. It's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
There's also a commission in this bill that looks at how the formula calculates the municipal contribution, and what's called the foundation of what the town should chip in, essentially. Here on the Cape, we've always been at a lot, we've sort of been on a losing end of this because it primarily is based on property values. And our property values here are sort of so out of whack from what most folks sort of make from an income perspective.
Right.
So we'll be taking a look at that as well.
Wonderful.
But we're talking about a significant increase. My understanding is the Dennis-Yarmouth district, as an example, will go from about a 50% to 70% of support from the state. So it's pretty significant resources that are going to be coming our way.
That would help them and certainly ease tension in that
I
area.
hope.
So that's wonderful. Moving on to a slightly different topic, in May, the Cape Cod Times reported that opiate-related deaths were on the rise again. I know you're working on legislation that impacts mental health, substance abuse, and recovery. You've had at least 2 hearings on these matters. Can you give us an update and tell us more about it?
Sure. So as viewers may remember, this session I'm the chair of the Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. And so we're tasked with looking at the opioid epidemic, other drug and alcohol and addiction related issues and challenges, and mental health. On the opioid epidemic, we've made some pretty significant investments recently that I've been talking about around harm reduction, right? So making sure that we get the tools and resources there out to people who are using opioids, who are addicted to opioids, to help keep people alive until they can get into treatment. So we're continuing on that. On the mental health piece, we have Massachusetts and a whole host of health metrics. We tend to do a really good job around healthcare, right? We got some big issues. The biggest issue being that it essentially costs everyone too much. But that's not the case. We're not number one when it comes to mental health. And so we're trying to take a really hard look in the committee and on my staff about what do we do to really transform mental health. Right now, we really don't have a mental health system, right? We have component parts of a system.
Right.
We don't have really a continuum of care for people to make sure that they're getting access to services they need, when access to inpatient treatment when it's needed, a warm handoff into outpatient and community-based services.
Right.
So it's really something we're beginning to sink our teeth into. If viewers have thoughts, ideas, challenges they've had in their own life, they should reach out. Please reach out to me and to my office. We'd love to hear about this, but it's something that we're working on, and we'll be working on in earnest going into the fall and in the winter.
Wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that you're continuing to work on that. It is very needed. Finally, our region might be facing a public health crisis. The mosquito-borne virus EEE has been found in multiple towns across the Cape. Many people, myself included, are terrified of the implications. What can you tell us about it, and what advice do you have for your constituents at this time?
So Eastern equine encephalitis is something that we're seeing broadly more of here in Massachusetts. We were talking earlier about climate disruption.
Yes.
This is one of the things that we're seeing in part. But we Eastern equine encephalitis EEE is really terrifying in that it's a mosquito-borne illness, and that an encephalitis is a pretty significant illness if you receive it. I think as of the day we're taping this, we've had a 3rd death in the state. So first and foremost, I think the most important precaution folks can take, right, is either staying indoors during peak mosquito hours, wearing full clothing. Certainly bug spray helps. Also, standing water around home. Say you got a pot or a little something. Make sure there's not standing water. That's prime mosquito breeding.
Right.
What we're seeing on Cape Cod, the hot spot for EEE is in southeastern Massachusetts, in sort of a swampy area, a region known as the Hockomock Swamp, and that's really where the virus is amplified, and we're most concerned about. But the fact that we're seeing EEE in several communities, including on the Outer Cape, including on the Upper Cape, likely is from birds sort of carrying the virus, coming into some contact with mosquitoes. We're less concerned that it will be amplified here, but it's certainly a risk. So hopefully by the time hopefully we're going to get some cool nights. I mean, it's been, on one end, it's been one of the most beautiful September in memory, right? And every other day we're like, is it the last beach day? But hopefully these cooler climes coming soon are going to really eliminate the risk. But I think it's really important that we're vigilant about it. And I think another reason why we need to be even more prepared around public health, around climate disruption. We're seeing just more and more of these things that we're not, it's not sort of business as usual, but really encouraging folks to take some precautions, to be cautious, and hope for nice warm days, but definitely cool nights. Will put a damper on the mosquitoes for sure.
Okay, I certainly hope so. Thank you for the fabulous advice, and again, I'm glad to hear that you are taking care of this. So how can people contact you or learn more about the initiatives you're working on?
So if you just visit senatorsear.com, you can get a whole host of information. MAlegislature.gov as well is a really great resource. Say you have a question about a bill, you just Google MAlegislature.gov and you can search a bill, you can actually track that bill. And then you can email me personally. It's julian.cyr, C-Y-R, at masenate.gov. And then my office number is 617-722-1570. So really encourage folks to reach out, to chime in. This really helps me and my team sort of guide our work, what our priorities for Cape Codders and Islanders, and that's very helpful. So they're never shy, and I expect they will continue not to be, and we appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Our viewers love these legislative updates. We hope you come back real soon.
You bet.
With Cape Media News Conversations, thank you for watching. I'm Gabrielle Rosson.